Good morning. Welcome to the Alabama Aquarium at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab and to our Boardwalk Talks program. My name is Mendel Graber. I am one of the educators here at the lab, and this morning we are joined by Alena Anderson and Danielle McAree from Mississippi State University's Coastal Restoration and Conservation lab over in Biloxi, Mississippi, and they are with the Marine Fisheries Ecology program in that lab. And so they are going to talk with us about sharks, but it also looks like they've got some rays, and maybe we'll talk about skates too, and also the research that their lab is doing on sharks in the northern Gulf area. So with that, I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about what they've brought and what they do, and then we'll kind of, have a conversation with them, which you all are welcome to join in.
Sounds great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Like she said, my name's Alena. This is Danielle. We both work full-time for Mississippi State University, but down here on the coast in Biloxi. So we traveled here to be with you today. We actually do a lot of our research and our field work out of Dauphin Island. So we make this trip quite a bit, no problem. And we work full-time, and we're also master's students. So if you've got any questions for us about our research there at the end or what we do in both of those realms, feel free to ask. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about our lab, what we do, what kinds of things we study, and then we're going to kind of go through all the things you see out here. So this is just a little taste of what we do, and we like to come and bring some of our research to outreach events like this so we can share it with people like you. So like Mendel was saying, our lab, thank you so much, Danielle, for being my model. Our lab is called the Marine Fisheries Ecology program. Anyone have any guesses as to what we study just based on those three words? You can shout them out. Fish, yes. Yes. Anything else? Mussels, not so much, but we do collaborate with some people who do that. Yes.
It's all marine life.
Yeah, a lot of marine life. So just going through each of those words, we study things in marine systems, so salt water rather than fresh water. We study things to do with fisheries. So I always ask the kids out there, what does that even mean? That could be working with recreational fishermen or commercial fishermen. So we work a lot with stakeholders, people who are out there on the water, even more so than we are. And they come to us with problems that we can try to help them solve, or we'll reach out to them to help us collect data for things that we've got going on, different kinds of studies. Ecology, study of ecosystems. So just those give you a little bit of background about what we do, what we study. A lot of that is things to do with reef fish, things to do with snappers, groupers, all of those guys, fishermen, and especially sharks and rays. So that's why we've brought the fun stuff here to show you guys. So that's what we're going to focus on for the majority of the Boardwalk talk. Anyone have questions about that before I get into our sharks?
Let's just add to fisheries, because I think that word does confuse people, and it is also used to refer to things that are not fish. So managed resources like oysters, you mentioned mussels. So fisheries might encompass other managed aquatic or marine resources that are not fish.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Awesome. I think what we're going to move into next is some of our shark anatomy, basic shark biology. But very first, I have a question for you guys. Is a shark a fish? Who's thinking yes? Who's thinking no? Who's not so sure and they're a little bit afraid to raise their hand? That's okay too. So to answer your question, yes, a shark is a fish. It's just a pretty cool kind of fish that has some special adaptations. Anyone know any of those adaptations? What makes a shark different than other kinds of fish? Skin. It does have a pretty unique kind of scale. Those are called dermal denticles. So we've actually got a pretty cool 3D model over here of what their scales look like really close up. We've got some microscopic images too. But it's actually made out of the same material as their teeth. That's why we call them dermal denticles.
Would it be okay to touch?
Yeah, absolutely.
So delicate.
Yeah. And each species has a little bit different of a shape of that scale, but they're all really protected. You can see how they all lay on top of each other. So they do have scales. They're modified scales. Anyone else have any ideas? Why might a shark be different than other kinds of fish? Teeth. What about their, yep, they've got a whole lot of teeth in there. And they do what we call serial tooth replacement. So their teeth are always multiplying. They're growing new teeth in the back of their jaw so that they can replace one that falls out. So that's what we call serial tooth replacement. What about their skeletons? Do sharks have bones? The answer is kind of. It's not true bones. So they have cartilaginous skeletons. That makes them really flexible as they swim through the water. So their skeletons are made out of what we would think is the same material as our ears or the tip of our nose, right? So they're very flexible and very lightweight and buoyant. Yeah?
I do find that kind of hard to explain. So they do have vertebrae, they do have jaws, the kinds of individual parts of our skeleton that we would refer to as bones, but they're not made of bone.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. And Danielle and I actually study age and growth of different shark species. We'll get into that later, but we do use their vertebrae to study how old they are. Did you have a question?
No, that you were asking differences. They have multiple gill covers instead of a single gill cover on each side.
Very true. Yeah. So just looking at the external or outside anatomy of this shark here, that's something that I was going to point out here. These are the gills, right, on either side of our shark. And typically sharks will have 5 gill slits here. If they don't, it's typically 6 or 7 gills, and that's easy to remember because those are 6 gill sharks and 7 gill sharks. So no problem. So just looking at the external anatomy of this guy, first, does anyone know what species of shark this is? Any guesses?
Sharp nose?
Not a sharp nose, not a sand shark. This is a baby bull shark, yeah. So these guys get a lot bigger than this, obviously. And we'll go through some of the unique characteristics of each of these species if you'd like. But we'll go through some external anatomy here. Does anyone know the names of these fins? Top, yep, dorsal fins. So most sharks have 2 dorsal fins, the first dorsal fin and second dorsal fin right here. They've got paired fins here. These are similar name to a muscle we've got right here, our pecs, right? These are the pectoral fins. These are their pelvic fins. They've got an anal fin and then their tail fin or caudal fin. So you can actually tell quite a bit about how sharks move through the water just by looking at how their body is shaped. And something we like to point out is the shape of the caudal fins. So you can see this shark right here has a long upper lobe and a short lower lobe of the caudal fin. We call that a heterocircle tail. And then this shark here has similar shaped upper and lower lobes, same length, homocircle caudal fin. Which shark do we think swims faster through the water? Who thinks shark A? Who thinks shark B? Yep, this guy is the fastest shark out there. That's a short fin mako. So you can tell a lot about how it swims just by looking at its body. If you look at the body shapes even, what are they kind of shaped like? Who's got this guy's pretty much looks like a torpedo or a bullet, something you could throw through the pool, right? It's built for speed with the really pointy snout right there, whereas this guy's got a much more blunt snout. The shape of the fins makes a difference too. You can see that this guy's got pretty small dorsal fins. You can barely even see right here. That's actually its second dorsal fin. So, not a lot of drag through the water. If you look at the gill slits, what's the difference here between the gill slits? Which one has bigger gill slits? This guy, right? Any ideas as to why? Yeah, more oxygen. So this guy's ready to sprint through the water. Yeah, I think that, this muscle right here, which this guy, this bull shark does not have. This is called a caudal keel. So it's got this really thick musculature right here that it can use to whip its tail through the water. So in a lot of ways, you can tell if you look closely that this one is built for speed, whereas this might be a little bit more slow moving. Going back through our external anatomy, we'll look at the underside. We've got two little holes here. Anybody know what those guys are? Yeah, so those are its nares, or what we would think of as its nostrils. And then importantly, if you were to look really close up, maybe Danielle can give us a lap or something at one of our other sharks. If you look very closely, sure, at the snout of these sharks, you'd see all these little dots or pores. So this is actually something that we explain is what a shark uses for its sixth sense. Has anyone heard that a shark has a sixth sense? Anyone know what the shark's sixth sense is? So they've got the same senses that we do, right? They can hear, they can smell, they can feel or touch. What am I forgetting? They can see. They can taste. They can also sense the electrical impulses of fish or animals in the water around them by using these pores. So these are filled with conductive gel, and they use that to feel the impulses of a fish swimming or maybe a heartbeat. Even if they can't see it, they can feel what's around them. So the pores, long name for the pores, it's called ampullae of Lorenzini, but now you know it. And you can see that some of these sharks are more specially adapted to have whole heads full of pores, right? All of those ampullae. And Mendel's walking around right there with one of our specimen. That's a bonnet head she's holding over there, one of the types of hammerheads. And they've got pores surrounding their whole entire cephalofoil, which is what we call the hammer part of the hammerhead. Cool. Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
All right. Really quick before we move on to each species, I think we're going to go through some external anatomy of these rays. So very similar body parts because these guys are related, sharks and rays and skates. So rather than pectoral fins that are free, these guys have a disc. Their pectoral fins are actually fused to their body. So this is what we would say are the pectoral fins of this guy. Anyone know what kind of stingray this is? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is an Atlantic stingray. He's a little bit smushed, but they've got these very pointy snouts right here. And you would find this if you are fishing off a pier around here, or if you're being very gentle and careful swimming in the water and shuffling your feet. Maybe you would see one swimming around at the beach. Their eyes are on top of their heads, or their bodies. And they've got these long tails. Typically the barb, we usually have a stingray barb with us. We can find it. This is the tail. The barb does not extend all the way to the end of the tail. The barb typically sits right here at the top, and it'll break off. It's made of similar material to our fingernails. So if threatened, the stingray can use the barb to defend itself, and then it'll grow back. On the underside here, its gills are at the bottom of its body, as well as its mouth. So similar body shapes and body parts. You can see the pelvic fins are here as well to the shark, but kind of in a different layout. Danielle's on the hunt. There's the stingray barb if you'd like to pass that around. So that's from a much bigger ray. Great. Any questions about any of that?
Not an Atlantic ray.
It's the very one.
Yeah.
That barb, it breaks off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, have people ever stepped on them? They break off?
Yep.
Can you get them out easily, or yeah?
They're tricky to get out. So if you look at the barb close up, you can see that the edges of it actually are kind of designed so it's difficult to pull out.
Like a
So
porcupine.
yes, yeah, exactly. The question was, if you step on one, is it easy to pull out? Answer, probably not, but you'll likely be fine.
Yeah, I mean for humans, but if you think about like a predator, like a hammerhead, or if you think about porcupine quills, they have a tendency to kind of work their way deeper in. So if you think if you've got some inflammation around that wound and it's swelling, actually kind of like pulls that in. So it's a way to maybe take out some of the predators kind of in a like a long range scheme for doing.
If you get one in your foot, where do you go?
If it comes out of your, if it comes out and you need it to be removed, that may be a doctor visit. Often they don't break. Like you might get a puncture that
They
doesn't
puncture
break.
you and then they just pull out. That's what the answer, sure. I shouldn't say.
All right. Any other questions for me? Yeah. How many vertebrae do they have?
That's a great question.
Danielle just did this recently.
So they're all different, and even within a species, it can range. There's no like distinct number. As Alena mentioned earlier, we're both working on shark age and growth projects for our master's degrees, so that involves looking at their vertebra. They accrete rings just like a tree does, so if you section the vertebra and look at them close up under a microscope, you can count the rings and estimate how old the shark is or was. So we're working on those projects right now. My project is on tiger sharks, looking at how old they get, how fast they grow, at what age they reach sexual maturity, that kind of thing. And I actually just dissected pretty much the entire vertebral column of a tiger shark, and I counted.
Wait, have them guess.
Oh, okay. Yeah. What's your guess?
Yes.
In a tiger shark. For reference, the vertebral column starts about here at the back of the skull and extends all the way to the end of the tip of their tail.
48.
Higher.
175.
Higher. It was approximately 215 vertebrae. Yeah, the ones in the tail are super duper tiny, almost like those little seed beads that people make designs with. But, yep.
They have a rib cage.
They don't have a rib cage, so that's something special about sharks in comparison to bony fishes. Their skeleton is basically just a skull, a vertebral column that extends all the way to the tip of their tail, and then they have supports for each of their fins. So they have something called the pectoral girdle that goes across their chest and separates their heart from the rest of their body cavity, and kind of protects the heart in a little case of cartilage, and then a pelvic girdle supporting the pelvic fins. And then that's pretty much it.
Alena, can you show them the spiracles?
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that.
And the angel shark?
Yes, actually, I'm leaving this guy for a little bit later for a trick question. If you were paying attention, maybe you'll know the answer later. So on our rays here and some other species, you might notice these little holes behind their eyes. So these are called spiracles. And instead of constantly swimming forward, like say one of these sharks needs to keep oxygen moving over their gills and into their body. Oh, very cool. These spiracles allow the animal to sit still and pump water over their gills. So instead of moving constantly to breathe, they can just chill. They could also just hide under the sand. So you can see their eyes are on top of their head. So even if they bury themselves under there, they can still be pumping water over their gills, breathing under there. They don't have to be constantly moving, and they've also got their eyes on the top so they can see what's going on. So that's what that is for.
Yeah.
And then you've got a couple of rays over there that are not stingrays.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. You
Yeah,
wanna go
so
through 'em?
I can start with those.
Yeah.
So something really cool about sharks and rays in general, we have a huge diversity of sharks and rays just right off the coast here. We caught all of these right in our universe here, right off the coast of Mississippi and Alabama. You can tell a lot about how these animals live their lives, what kinds of things they eat, what habitat they live in, just by looking at parts of their body. So for example, a lot of the rays, you can tell they are benthic, which means they live on the sea floor. You know, they're flattened, they can bury themselves in the sand. And also, their body shapes are really conducive to the way they live their lives. So for example, this little guy is called a smooth butterfly ray. It's technically not a stingray because it doesn't have a sting or a barb. This is its whole tail here. It's super, super dinky.
So cute.
But you can see these guys have super elongated pectoral fins, or their disc is super elongated. What do you guys think they might use this for? Swimming, yep. But it also has an alternate use. So these guys are pretty cool, and they can actually use their disc to whip prey that's swimming over them and stun it. So they're ambush predators. They'll bury themselves in the sand or along the bottom, and a little fish swimming by, they can whack it with their disc and just gobble it up. They don't have to swim after it or chase it down or anything.
Butterfly rays can get quite large.
They
This
do
is
get
very
a lot
small.
bigger than this, yeah.
Yeah.
But these guys are pretty cute.
Like,
Yeah.
A lot of people have never even seen or heard of one.
Mhm.
But we catch them
Yeah.
all the time.
I think we pulled this one right here in Mobile Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then something like this guy, also a ray, but technically not a stingray. This has a different form of defense other than a sting. Does anyone have a guess as to what might be? They have these special organs in their body that can do something pretty crazy. So this,
Over here?
oh yeah.
Yes.
It is. It's electric. So this guy is called a lesser electric ray. And they have these kind of kidney bean shaped organs on their disc here, and they can actually generate electricity. So they can use that maybe to stun a prey item or to deter a predator that's trying to eat them.
It's not a lot either. It's
Is there
not
like a
too much
chemical
to.
in there that interacts with salt?
I'm honestly not sure the mechanism. I don't know how it works. Do you know?
The battery that's got
Yeah.
acid in it.
Yeah,
I don't
it's a good point.
think it's chemical.
They store the electrical impulses of their body, so like their
Oh,
heart
gotcha.
beating like the shark was
Yeah.
sampling, so they'll store those like an alternator, so they'll shunt electrical impulses from their heart and their muscles twitching into those organs, and they'll let you know go fast. They don't mess around,
Is that
Yeah.
like an electron flow?
essentially.
Super cool. I'll have to remember that.
Yeah.
And these guys don't get huge. Again, these are from right around here, but there are members of their family that get way, way bigger than this.
With a low amperage?
Yeah, yeah. They'll definitely zap you, but these ones won't. They won't do too much damage. I'll go through some of these other guys up here. I'll start off with this one. Anyone remember what this was called? Yep, short fin mako shark. Like Alena said, the fastest shark in the ocean. What do y'all think the mako shark might eat? Why does it need to go so fast?
Tuna.
Yeah, so these guys love fast-moving prey like tuna, mackerel, that kind of thing. And you can see they're really built for that specialized prey. They are built to go super duper fast with this caudal keel and this homocircle caudal fin. They have these huge gill slits for sprinting really fast through the water. And you can kind of assume where in the water they live just by looking at the rest of their body. So they have these big eyes, so we can assume that they're a visual predator. They rely mostly on their vision to find their food. Something also interesting is by looking at the coloration. What do you notice about the coloration of this shark? Yeah, so the shark is dark on top and light on the bottom. This is what we call counter shading. So that when you're maybe a predator, larger shark, or a prey item above the shark looking down in the water, this blue dark top side blends in with the rest of the blue ocean beneath the shark. And if you're a predator or prey item below this shark looking up against the sky, this white belly blends right in with the white of the sky. So these guys are especially adapted to hunt for fast-moving prey in that clear, open water.
Other fish, that's a common body form for other fast fish.
Mhm.
So if you can call to mind a picture of, say, a dolphin fish, a mahi-mahi, or a mackerel, they have that kind of pinched tail and the
Yeah, if y'all are ever here in July for the Alabama Deep Sea Fishing Rodeo, I strongly encourage you to come by. It's super cool. But if you look at the swordfish that they're pulling in and weighing in, they have tails really similarly shaped to this. Okay, you all saw this guy up pretty close. You remember what this was called? Yeah, so this is a bonnethead shark. It's the smallest kind of hammerhead that we have in the Gulf. And these guys are pretty cool, and they also have some pretty crazy adaptations. So like all hammerheads, they have this elongated head, which we call the cephalofoil. And the reason hammerheads' heads are shaped that way is because of that electroreceptive sense that Alena mentioned earlier. All of these sharks and rays up here have those ampullae of Lorenzini to detect electrical impulses, but hammerheads, since their heads are so broad, they have way more of them than these other sharks up here. So they use their heads almost like a metal detector. They have that super sensitive sense, and they can find prey even if it's buried in the sand. And it just so happens that a hammerhead's favorite prey item is a stingray. So they're really specially adapted to hunt for stingrays. And something that we notice in our regular jobs is anytime we come across a hammerhead that's stranded on the beach or something, we always look at every part of its body and take samples and, dissect it and see what was going on. And every single hammerhead that we've ever looked at has had a stingray barb embedded in its jaw, or dozens. We've seen all of them out the wazoo.
How big does the bonnethead get?
Bonnetheads don't get huge. These guys only get about 5.5 feet long. If you see a little shark cruising along the beach here, especially off the west end, really good chance it's one of these guys. Something else special about bonnetheads, can you hand me the jaw? Is their diet. So just like the body shape and coloration of a shark can tell you about where it lives and maybe the prey it eats, the jaw can also tell you a lot about that same thing. So bonnetheads have really sharp teeth in the fronts of their mouths, but the backs of their mouths have pretty much molars, just like our teeth. They're flat and rounded and not pointed at all. What do you think that might tell you about the kinds of things that they eat? Any guesses?
Crabs or something?
Crabs, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So bonnetheads have sharp teeth in the front of their mouths that allow them to catch something like a fish, something slippery. But in the backs of their mouths, they have these molariform teeth that they can use for crunching and chewing. So they can eat things like crabs, like shrimp, and they're actually specially adapted to eat seagrass. They're the only shark that we know of that is omnivorous. They can eat plants and animals. So pretty special.
Cool.
Do they swim in schools, or are they more individual?
The question was, do they swim in schools? Bonnetheads, as far as I know of, are pretty solitary, but some other hammerheads are known to school up, especially if you've ever seen videos or like documentaries on National Geographic or anything. Scalloped hammerheads are known to make big, big schools around Costa Rica and everything. So, yeah, no problem. Let's see. Let's talk about this guy. So, this is a baby bull shark. We know it's a baby.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even say.
Because it has this on its belly. Any guesses about what this little mark is? Yeah, it's the belly button. So, not all sharks reproduce this way, but some do. They have placentas or placental attachments, just like mammals do. But unlike us, these belly buttons will close up after a couple months. So we know this is a very young bull shark because it still has its belly button. You can tell that a bull shark is specially adapted to live in something like Mobile Bay, where the water isn't so blue and clear like where the mako shark lives. It has pretty small eyes, so we can assume that it doesn't really rely on its eyes for hunting its prey. It mostly relies on its other senses, like its electroreception or its sense of smell. And bull sharks can do something pretty unique that a lot of other sharks can't do. Any guesses about what that is, or does anybody know? It has to do with the places they can go. Bull sharks are specially adapted to be able to travel in and out of fresh water. So they can actually travel upriver, and a lot of times female bull sharks will travel into rivers and estuaries to give birth, because none of these other sharks up here can do that. So it gives these baby bull sharks a refuge from predators. They're safe up there in the estuaries, and really nothing up there can eat them.
Not so long ago, it was thought that in Africa that was a different species.
Yeah. So Mendel mentioned that they thought there was a different species of shark in Africa. I forget what lake. Do you remember what the lake was called? Yes, Zambezi. It was thought that it was a special freshwater species of shark. Turns out it was just a landlocked population of bull sharks. So they're pretty crazy. But these guys have been found in the Mississippi River as far north as Illinois. So it's not super common, but they can do it. And you can see they're specially adapted for those murky river environments. They have this small eyes. They use their other senses for hunting their prey.
So is Mobile Bay like a main nursery area for bull
Yeah, Mobile Bay is a super important nursery ground for baby bull sharks. We have a project right now. One of our PhD students in our lab is looking at that right now. But estuaries, Mobile Bay, Lake Pontchartrain, all of these areas around here that have kind of brackish water, freshwater influences are super important nursery grounds for bull sharks. Yeah, it's a good observation.
And y'all had tagged ones, way up.
Yeah. We've had tagged sharks go all the way up in and out of these river systems. So it's pretty cool to see. Okay, anyone know what this is? I mentioned it earlier.
Tiger shark.
Yep, tiger shark. This is about as small as they get. They're born probably this long, and they get way bigger than this. But tiger sharks are pretty crazy. They're pretty cool. Here's what their teeth look like. If you want, you can pass these around. Just be careful. The teeth are pretty sharp. But just like the bonnet head, looking at their teeth, you can tell a little bit about their diet. Excuse me. You can do the same thing with a tiger shark. So they have those super broad, serrated teeth that almost look like saw blades. And if you look closely, you can notice that the top teeth and the bottom teeth are pretty much mirror images of each other. Can anyone guess what a tiger shark might be able to eat with those kinds of teeth? Anything? Sure. Anyone else? Okay, well, you're right. You answered it. Tiger sharks can and will eat anything. We affectionately call them the trash cans of the ocean, or the garbage cans of the ocean, because they can and will eat pretty much anything they come across. We do know that one of their favorite prey items is a sea turtle, and they have those really powerful teeth and jaws to be able to do that. But people have also found some pretty crazy things in the stomach of a tiger shark. For example, one researcher, I think out of the Red Sea, dissected a tiger shark, and in its stomach they found a whole short-fin mako. They found the remains of a ram, the skeleton of a ram. They found a European bee eater, which is a type of songbird, and not one but 2 sealed jars of mayonnaise. So they're not picky eaters. They'll eat whatever they can. Even tartar sauce. Yeah, they need a little seasoning. Yeah. But to go along the same lines as that songbird that those guys found, our lab did a pretty cool study a few years ago, just before we got here. We kept catching these baby tiger sharks on our long line, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the kinds of research that we do. But when we pull these sharks on board, sometimes they regurgitate whatever's in their stomach, just out of stress, you know? And we noticed that they kept coughing up bird feathers. which maybe isn't so unusual. You know, maybe they were picking off seagulls that landed at the surface, but we decided to look into it a little bit further, and we worked with some bird researchers in our building. We did some genetic analysis and stuff like that, and tried to identify what kinds of birds these feathers were coming from. We found something pretty crazy. Not a single one of the feathers or other bird remains came from a seabird. There were no seagulls, no pelicans, no terns, none of that. All of the remains came from songbirds, like finches and sparrows and wrens, stuff like that. And we're catching these way out in the Gulf. We're in the Alabama Reef Permit Zone, 30 miles offshore plus. How are these little songbirds getting out in the middle of the Gulf, and why are there so many of them? Yep, you got it right. So we found that whenever we were seeing the feathers and these tiger sharks coughing up these feathers, it lined up pretty perfectly with the spring and fall bird migrations. So as these songbirds are flying across the Gulf to get to their wintering grounds or breeding grounds, sometimes they'll hit a storm or the young birds just won't make it and they'll fall into the water. And turns out it's a pretty important food source for these baby tiger sharks. You know, they're pretty floppy at this stage. They're not great predators, so they're mostly scavengers at this age. And turns out these fallen songbirds are pretty convenient food sources for these baby tiger sharks. So it's just a really cool thing to note, like how these different ecosystems can interact with each other. And yeah, the different connections that even these terrestrial ecosystems can have way offshore. So yeah, pretty crazy. The last thing I'll talk about, second to last thing I'll talk about on this table here is this guy. Has anyone seen anything like this before? Yeah, I wish I was there when we caught this. But this is called a gulper shark. These guys, well, where do you guys think these live? Where in the ocean? Deep, dark. What kinds of things make you say that? The coloring? Yeah, the eye. Yeah, so just like these other sharks are specially adapted to live somewhere pelagic or estuarine or shallow, stuff like that. These gulper sharks are specially adapted to live deep. So unlike the mako shark, the gulper doesn't really have any kind of counter shading because it's dark at the bottom of the ocean. There's no light anyway, so there's nothing to blend into but the darkness. They have these huge eyes to let in as much light as possible to see down there. And something else cool that none of these sharks have anything, you can't see it on these sharks, but gulper sharks have pretty big spiracles. So it's dark down there, there isn't a lot of food, there isn't a lot of oxygen. These guys don't want to waste their energy, swimming around hunting for prey. So they are slow moving, they're pretty much just hanging out, swimming pretty slowly at the bottom. So they have these spiracles to pump water over their gills so they don't need to keep swimming and wasting energy just to breathe. And one other cool feature about the gulper shark is you look at these folds on its throat here. That's what gives it its name. The gulper shark is able to really expand its throat super wide and take big gulps of prey because, again, there isn't a lot of food at the bottom of the ocean. There aren't a lot of resources, so they need to be able to take advantage of whatever food they come across.
So another shark species that's more familiar to most people is the nurse shark that has spiracles because they spend a lot of time resting on the bottom. But can you hold that up again and kind of like flash it? Because you can see how shiny it is. And that isn't wetness. It's the dermal denticles. They are like our teeth, and so they have that dentin in them, and so a lot of sharks look really shiny like that. That one looks particularly shiny.
Yeah, it really does.
Other ones that are there, but when you come and you kind of come up to the table and you kind of look at them, you can see that shininess.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, at the end of our talk here, I definitely encourage you all to come up here and touch all these different species, and you can really even feel the difference for yourself in their different characteristics. Okay, now I have a challenge for you all. We talked about sharks and rays and their external anatomy, and also about how that influences the way they live their lives. My challenge for you is identify this. Is this a shark or is this a ray? You can even pass it around if you want to look at it closer. Form your answer, and then we'll take a vote.
Where was it found?
Right here.
Trawl.
Yeah, in a trawl, right in Mobile Bay, I believe.
Any questions in the meantime? Happy to answer.
How deep is the culprit?
About 300 meters, I'd say. So, like 1,000 feet deep. We basically have to go right off the shelf to catch these. Maybe we'll see some more
Hopefully
this year.
soon.
Is a flounder in the same category as the rays, or is it a little different?
That's a good question.
They're not actually. So flounder is a bony fish, but you can see it's what we call like convergent evolution. So it's a totally different order of fishes, a whole different category, but they have the same body shape because they have pretty similar habits. They're another benthic species. They live on the sea floor, and they have they're shaped just like a ray. So it's pretty fascinating.
So another kind of interesting note about shark skeletons is that except for the teeth, which again have that dentin that makes them harder, they don't fossilize very well. I have found a few shark teeth. I have found
She's the shark
two.
tooth whisperer. Don't let her say
I have found 2 shark vertebrae, and let me tell you, that's a lot more exciting than finding fossil shark teeth. But because of that, there's kind of the fossil record of sharks primarily comes from teeth. So I have a friend who's a paleontologist who works at McWane Science Center in Birmingham, Alabama, and he is the director of the second largest natural history collection in the state, and he has been doing research on fossil sharks for years. So a few years ago, I introduced him to the head of their lab, Dr. Marcus Dryman, and they've done some interesting collaborations on kind of shark evolution. So it's useful for a paleontologist to see a lot of shark specimens that kind of give them references for the fossils that they're finding, and then it's useful for shark ecologists to understand some of the evolutionary paths of sharks. You guys have any shark fossil projects?
We are working on some dentition work for black-nosed sharks. So the species that I'm studying is black-nosed sharks, and June's helping me out a little bit, our friend and our colleague, with looking at how those teeth change and how they might change in relation to their mating seasons. So these people do all sorts of work that I could never dream of being able to look at a tooth and say, yes, that's from this species at this stage, and it's in the back of the mouth, and all of those things. It's very crazy, the work that they do. So on our end, we are collecting samples for these people. So that's the fun, easy part. And then they get to do the nitty-gritty work of looking at exactly when those tooth shapes change and what that means.
Well, and one of the collaborations that's really cool is that people have no idea Alabama is the state with more shark species than any state by leaps and bounds, even though our coast is only this small. And so right now, I think the number's like 200.
Like including fossil sharks.
Yeah, and including fossils, but about 225 species from Huntsville all the way down as you go, which is
So
pretty
just to
impressive.
elaborate on what Alena was explaining, just like we have different, like our teeth have different forms in different locations in our mouth, our molars, our incisors, Sharks will have their teeth will have different forms in different places in their mouth, but then their teeth look different at different phases of their life, and they're finding that they may also have just kind of like a breeding set of teeth that is just kind of like a temporary, just like a seasonal set of teeth. So trying to identify something, just by the teeth with that level of complexity in the, different forms of their teeth is pretty challenging.
Mm-hmm.
So I see you guys also have some tests over there if you want to.
Yeah, we'll get into it really quick. Answer to our question, and I'll pull this stuff up.
Who votes shark? Who votes ray? Da, 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 da. This is an Atlantic angel shark. So that's why it's a test. It is a shark, but it's pretty much shaped like a ray. There's a few things that tell us that it is in fact a shark and not a ray. The main ones being the pectoral fins. So if you remember Alena's anatomy lesson at the beginning, a ray's pectoral fins are fused with its head. So they start and end and are fully connected with the rest of its body, whereas a shark's pectoral fins are free from its body. Although, just looking at it, it looks like it's all fused. If you look closely, the pectoral fins are in fact free from the body. So that's one hint. The other main hint are the placement of the gills. So the gills on a ray are on the bottom of their bodies, and the gills on the shark are on the side. And again, this guy's pretty tricky. It's kind of hard to even see its gills, but they're tucked in right here, almost at the shoulder, on the side of their head. So those are a couple of the main things that tell us that this is a shark and not a ray. But they do behave like a lot of these rays do, and these guys are also ambush predators. So they will bury themselves in the sand, and you can kind of see they have this huge mouth at the end here, at the edge of their head, and they can pop out and swallow a prey item that's just swimming by.
Mm-hmm.
They also get a lot bigger.
Yeah, these guys also get a lot bigger.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Two
Yeah.
questions. We catch the bonnet heads,
Mm-hmm.
and it's those sharks right there, I think, off the beach.
The bull shark?
The bull shark, yeah. I mean, that's who I
Mm-hmm.
remember catching. Well, I know, I just was wondering, those were the main two we catch, I think.
We also have, we didn't bring it with us today, but the Atlantic sharp-nosed shark is the most common shark in the Gulf, and small, pointy. You can't always depend on the freckles, but they do have white spots along their body. So that's one of the smaller sharks you would see around here and maybe catch off a pier or at the beach.
People catch a lot more sharp nose, black tips. There are a handful of sharks that are much more common, like right off the beach, that people might catch shore fishing than bull sharks.
And even the one she mentioned that she studies is really hard to tell unless you really know, know that it's that you're not looking for other things. Oh, I've seen a black tip, but that black nose gets its name. It looked like it dipped its face in your chimney or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pay attention, close attention next time.
Yeah.
I just want to see exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, I understand that some of those sharks that just move their gills and they can breathe, they push the water through. I understand that some of them, they got to be moving. They open up the gills and they got to be moving. If they're not moving, they suffocate.
Yep, that's
And I
right.
imagine
So.
those are those fast ones.
Yeah, definitely. So as we mentioned, the rays up here have those spiracles, as well as this shark over here, the gulper shark. So they're able to sit down there, pump water and oxygen over their gills. And as Mendel mentioned, that's something that nurse sharks also do. So if you see one of those in an aquarium, you'll see they like to hide and sit still usually.
That's called
And-
ram ventilation, and that's really
forgot this guy
common
can also
among
do that.
sharks. And sometimes you might hear that sharks have to swim to breathe, to live, and that is true for some sharks, but not all.
And the angel shark is also a good example of a shark with spiracles. So it's it's an ambush predator. It buries under the sand, so yeah, exactly. So it uses its spiracles to pump water over its gills instead of swimming. Yeah.
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 I heard in the past they always have to move
Yeah. So, yeah, that's true for some species like the mako shark. Like it has to allow water to pass over its gills. But yeah, they're all pretty different. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Of
no
course.
problem.
And feel free to cut us off whenever we need
yeah.
to. But we'll tell you a little bit about some of the research that we do and exactly how we caught the sharks that are sitting here on the table before we go today. So this is what we call a Gangen. Our lab has been running a long-term survey since 2006. We have been doing the same thing every spring and every fall. So we've got 2 field seasons that don't usually change at all, and we do the same thing every spring and fall, so it's standardized. We put out a mile-long piece of monofilament mainline and hook 100 of these Gangens, or hooks, onto the mile-long mainline. So this is what we call a bottom long line survey, and we are typically anywhere from like 30 to 70 miles offshore. So sometimes it takes us like 3 hours to get out there, which is always very exciting. Get out there, set the main line. We put 100 of these hooks out. As you can see, this is maybe a little bit thicker line than you're used to using. Maybe the hooks are a bit bigger than you're used to using if you're just a recreational fisherman around here. So this is all intended to catch big fish. We will set 100 of these hooks out. They're all baited with Atlantic mackerel. So the same thing every time. We cut them all in half and we get shipments of bait down here. We wait 1 hour exactly, and then we reel everything back up. So does anyone have any guesses about what happens next? What are we recording when we bring these things back onto the boat? Any guesses? Size. Yep. So one of the most important things we do is record the size of all of these fish, and we take several different length measurements. We always go tip of the nose or snout right here to firstly the pre-caudal length right here. So this is the caudal fin. This is the pre-caudal pit, so we'll measure right here. We'll measure to the fork length, so right here where the fin forks, and then the stretch total length. So 3 different length measurements. We'll stretch this fin as long as it goes and take a full length measurement there. Any other ideas of what we might be recording while it's on board?
Weight.
Yep, weight. That's the next thing we do typically before we let it go. We'll use a spring scale and record the weight of the fish. Anything else?
How do you age a shark?
That's a great question. The question was, how do we age a shark? So we can't do that right now as it is with our current technologies unless we are lethally sampling.
Alena, wait, let's clarify, because a lot of those sharks go back into the water alive after
Yeah.
they do their measurements. So you're seeing some of the ones that they, have collected and they've, brought back to preserve. They use them for education, for outreach like this, education for the public, but also education for college students, grad students. So they do harvest some of the fish, but a lot of them go back into the water alive. So
Yep.
she's talking about the necessity for, a lethal harvest in order to do this study, but a lot of these animals do go back alive.
Yep, so unless we have a current study that requires lethal sampling, which is not all the time and is definitely not on every species, we are catching all of these fish, recording all of this data, tagging the fish, and releasing it. So for my study, which I'm done sampling for now, I was collecting vertebrae from black-nosed sharks. Danielle was collecting vertebrae from tiger sharks to be used to collect age data. So you have to remove the vertebrae and then look at the rings, like Danielle mentioned earlier, from a thin section under a microscope. So it looks kind of like a tree ring would, and they usually will grow a ring every year. I'm saying all of these qualifiers because, of course, fish don't always behave the way that we think they will. So typically they grow a ring every year, and you'd be able to count those rings under a microscope and then estimate the age of the fish. So this is important for things like fisheries management. We don't want to be taking too many mature individuals out of the population. So this is something that's important for fisheries managers to consider when they set fishing regulations.
How is that known? how is it known that the rings correlate to a year of growth?
That's a great question. So we have to validate and verify those things. It's done in a few different ways, but I'll give you an example of what I'm using. You can mark their vertebrae by staining it with an antibiotic. So some folks over at the Mississippi Aquarium so generously allowed me to inject some black-nosed sharks that they had on display with an antibiotic. No problem for the fish. But it did mark the vertebrae. When I look at it later under a microscope, it'll fluoresce at the time that I injected it. So I can then go back, see how much time I know has passed, and correlate that with how many rings that have grown. So that's one way that you can do that. Yep.
This is kind of a relatively new area of research. And so, I mean, if you have these processes that people become protocol, there's a history in establishing those protocols. So, you know, if you are aging sharks by counting those rings, you've got to have some kind of prior, you know, established, you know, truthing for this process, so that you know that you're not just assuming that each ring corresponds to a year. You have something else that kind of validates that.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
You have to kill the shark in order to age it, basically.
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
The only way, it's not like a regular fishery, they're counting rings on a scale or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Scales have been used. You can also use spines for some deep water species that do have spines, like our gulper shark has spines. So that's been done successfully for some species. But right now, the most common method is still using the vertebrae rings. Hopefully in the future, we'll develop some more standardized non-lethal ways to do that. And people are definitely working on that right now. But you do need some kind of ground truthing to be able to use those newer techniques and correlate those ages with what we know to be true, or what we hope to be true with those rings on the vertebrae. Yeah.
Is that a standard for all types of shark, that one ring equals approximately 1 year, or it does not vary? I would have to assume it does.
It does vary. So I think some are biennial or 2 rings a year. Some are slower than that. It's definitely not standardized. So that's one of the reasons that we have to make sure that they are depositing those annually. So.
And like when you hear about a Greenland shark, which is like the oldest living being that swims around in the world, you know, they grow really slow at some point. They might grow really fast, so those rings are really close or whatever. So when you hear that they're 500 years, maybe they're not quite 500 years, but you know, maybe can count 200, which is incredibly long for, you know, a really old, gigantic creature that's 18 feet long kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting. So something else kind of fun is Danielle and I have to basically do each other's studies together because you need 2 readers to be aging all of these fish to make sure that you're getting the same counts. So she helps me by aging all of my fish. I'm going to have to also help her by aging all of her tiger sharks. And it's really interesting looking at the difference between the species, just those 2 species. So hers grow a lot bigger than mine do, and much faster. So the rings and the spacing is wildly different than my black-nosed sharks. So pretty cool to look at.
So I'm a lot more familiar with some of the fisheries work that's done in our fisheries lab. We have some lab members in the audience. But just to kind of give you an idea of what might be done with this kind of information. So they work on sharks less, and they do a lot of work on a lot of different species of bony fish. And so one of the ways that they age, or the primary way that they age those fish, is by a little free-floating hard structure in their heads. It's called an otolith. And they, you know, have, this is the methodology, is to, it's a fatal illegal capture. They take those otoliths out, they slice them, they count the rings, but the kinds of applications for that kind of research might be, say, they make recommendations to managers or you know, regulators. They're not making regulations. The academic researchers are not making regulations, but their research may be used to inform regulations. And so they might age a fish and then correlate that with like their reproductive cycle. And then that might be used by regulators to say, well, this, and they've also taken size data. So they may know that this fish is, most reproductively active at this age, this size. And so we want to take pressure off of the species by regulating, that size and saying you can't take fish in that size range. That's, one potential application for this kind of, age and growth and like reproductive life cycle research.
And their lab does a lot of that work as well, in conjunction with the lab across the street here at the lab.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of what we do as a fisheries lab. Our main focus is fisheries, and a lot of times, usually at least once a year, we'll have somebody reach out to us from NOAA Fisheries. They say, hey, we're doing a stock assessment on this species in the Gulf of Mexico. Can you send us whatever data you have, whatever samples you have? And since we've been doing this standardized survey for so long, almost 20 years now, we usually have a lot of data to send them. So
NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So it is the federal agency that regulates marine fisheries.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about commercial or just recreation?
Both. There's a recreational season for several different fishery species. So again, fisheries would be those that have some kind of management to them. Like there are fish that nobody's setting regulations on them, on when and where and how many you can take. But the ones that are managed, will have those kinds of regulations for recreational and commercial.
So does NOAA set the regulations?
That depends.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated actually. Who sets the regulations?
So in state waters, it's going to be the individual states are going to have regulations, and then beyond state waters. So for Gulf states, it's 3 miles or 9 miles, depending on the state and on whom you ask. And then beyond that is federal waters, out to 268 miles is the like our national waters.
Thank you.
Thank you. No problem.
So when it comes to tagging those that are not, that are part of the survey, what, if it's a new tag, what goes on that tag, and is there any kind of a radio or microchip or something that can be used to collect where they go, not as much as what they are, how big they were? I'm assuming it includes how big they were, the estimated age, and all that kind of stuff is linked some way.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's the next thing I was going to say. So once we take all those measurements, of course we're writing down what the species is, how long it was when we caught it, all of our length measurements. We also write down whether it's a male or a female. So something pretty cool is that you can tell whether a shark is a male or a female just externally. So between its pelvic fins here, if it's a male, has claspers, these two external reproductive organs.
So that one's a baby, so its claspers aren't very big.
This one's pretty big.
Yeah. Yep. So it's pretty easy to tell. No claspers, female. Claspers, male. And that's really valuable for us because unlike other bony fishes that you have to open up and look internally to be able to tell if it's a male or a female, we can just look externally, jot it down, and then you've got a great idea of where the male versus female populations are traveling. So we'll note that, species, weight, and the last thing we do is tag the fish. So these are our typical conventional tags that we use. This is pretty much just a piece of plastic. It's got this metal part right here that we will put at the base of the dorsal fin. Here, you want to be my model. So this part will be sitting under the skin right here, and the red will be trailing out. So we'll insert that, and it's good to go. What is on the tag is a unique tag number, so we'll record that. says MSU 00102, which I would be shouting at Danielle to write down. We would be taking note of that, and then it's good to go. So if you were to catch this shark later, just fishing for fun or whatever, it says to report the tag for a reward and record the length measurements and where you were. So then we've got 2 points, right? We've got where we were and how big it was then, and then we've got where you were and how big it grew. So again, that's usually estimated, and we have to rely on the angler to give us a call. Doesn't always happen, and we've got a tag return rate of about 2 to 4%, I think, which is pretty typical for tagging studies. So again, we have to rely on the angler to give us a call, and then you've got those 2 points. Yes.
Is it all right if I pass that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have to return them to the water, or can you keep tagged fish?
You can keep the tag fish if it's legal. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can snip off the tag if you were going to return the fish to the water.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. You don't even have to call us if
No,
you get the
it's
tag.
not.
Like, there's no rules about it, but we have to rely on people, being willing to call us or input their information into our website in order to hear back from these. So it certainly helps us, but nothing's mandated.
And it's pretty cool. Then we'll
Yeah.
send you a little map of where we were, where it went between those 2 points. But like you mentioned, you don't know what it was doing in between, right? It could have been running all around. It could have done something funky. So that's just a piece of plastic. We've also got satellite tags that when we do have some to put them on sharks, it's pretty cool. They will give us a lot more information. And do the bull shark again.
Here, do it on this one. It's easy.
Okay, a lot more information about where the shark is going. So these, a little bit more invasive, and we'll do this on a much larger shark, but they'll get bolted to the dorsal fin like this. As you can imagine, we have to work very quickly when we bring these things on board so that we're not stressing the fish out too much, and we're not just throwing $2,000 into the water for fun, just for it to sink to the bottom. So we hope that this shark will be doing great when we release it, and it will also surface at some point because this one in particular has a wet-dry sensor. When it breaches the water, sends information to whatever satellites are hopefully above it in the sky. So it's a little bit different for each type of satellite tag. They all work a little bit differently. There's some that trail behind the shark. There's some that are set to pop off at a certain amount of time after being on the shark. And they last for different amounts of time too with the battery. So sometimes, usually I'd say between 6 months and a year is how much data you'd get from it. And then you're getting more precise data about exactly where the shark is, and we're able to track it.
So they would be relying, or they'd be selecting species that surface so that those tags, they can communicate with satellites. And also just keep in mind the cost difference. So there's a huge cost to the satellite tags compared to the pit.
Yes. And the last thing I'll mention is that we also sometimes use acoustic tags, internal tags. So that's something we were doing with tiger sharks. Hopefully we'll continue doing that. But that involves performing a little surgery, cutting their belly and implanting a small acoustic tag into their belly, and then hoping that the shark swims by a receiver that we have put somewhere in the water. So usually better for places that are more near shore, or sharks that will travel more near inshore and swim by a receiver to let it know, ping, ping, I am over here. So.
And that's how y'all have that bull shark data way up in the Mobile Tensal Delta.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
miles and miles above the city.
Yes. Lots of different types of tags. They're all helpful for different types of things. But yep, a lot of really cool movement data, distribution data that we get from those. Anything to add? Yeah.
So are you doing this research as part of a graduate program, or sort of interested in how long you've had to do this and how long this study is going to continue and sort of next steps?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a great question. Alena and I in particular have a pretty unique situation. So we are full-time employees at Mississippi State, working in the lab and working on all of our different funded projects. And then we also have our own personal master's projects. So
that's the agent growth
yeah,
stuff.
so we're both each working on our own agent growth projects, but we also have our hands in all of these labs projects. So that's all of the tagging things and stuff like that. And actually, all of the tagging projects we have going on right now are actually collaborations with other labs. So right now we're tagging baby tiger sharks in collaboration with Louisiana State University. We're tagging hammerheads for another researcher. Yeah, we pretty much, we work with a lot of people all over the Gulf and beyond. So it's not even just our own labs funded projects, but a lot of other people around.
Yeah, it's really valuable because we see a lot of samples and fish that people aren't able to get their hands on. So if we're already going out there anyway and collecting long-term data and doing this work, it's helpful for people to have us to collect samples for them for whatever they've got going on. So it's really cool for us to do. We get to learn all sorts of new things.
Very collaborative.
Yeah, exactly.
And being Mississippi State, so why are they here in Alabama? Well,
good point.
The head of their lab got his PhD here and started this project at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab and has moved across state lines. And that's the lab that he manages now, is his own lab here when he was across the street. And started this, instead of 20 years ago, started this project of all this tagging. So they have a huge data set. I don't know how many thousands, but it's almost 20 at this point. It's thousands and thousands of sharks that have been tagged at the least. And that sort of thing. So many graduate students have gone through what they're doing right now as well. So
we have something similar from my area through the Great Lakes Institute
Oh, yeah.
Environmental Research, which is funded out of the university I just retired from.
Oh,
But
cool.
It's become very similar types of work with tagging and spawning and looking at invasive species and a lot of interactive collaboration around both sides of the Great Lakes, right? So
Oh, that's super cool.
it is,
Yeah.
so it's really cool to see the comparisons and
Yeah.
the similar areas.
Yeah.
I also like to kind of explain extension a little bit because a lot of people are not familiar with extension. A lot of people maybe I think are more familiar with extension through agricultural or land grant colleges like Auburn University in Alabama or Mississippi State University, and they do programs with farmers, with gardeners, beekeepers. So they may do research that supports new technologies or new information for farmers or gardeners, soil science. But there is also coastal extension. So often these are partnerships between a land grant college like Auburn or Mississippi State and then NOAA's, and that's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Sea Grant Office. And so the extension is kind of a both like the outreach, the education, the work, providing services for the public and for people who might fishermen, whether that's recreational or commercial fisheries operations, and then also the research that they do.
Yeah. I mean, Mendel said it perfectly. We're not strictly a research program. We're an extension program. So a lot of our work focuses on stakeholders in Mississippi and Alabama's fisheries. So we work a lot with charter for hire captains. We work a lot with recreational fishermen, kind of like Alena was talking about earlier. Just as an example, one of our recent projects looking at shark depredation. So it's been a problem that's been growing a lot of traction in the past few years. A lot of anglers are frustrated with sharks essentially stealing the fish off their lines. It's a problem we've been hearing more and more about in the past few years, and we see it ourselves on our bottom longline survey. So one of our recent projects was working with charter for hire captains. We brought them all together, and we basically held a workshop talking about shark depredation, trying to understand their experience, like when did the problem start ramping up? What do you think are the species most responsible? Do you think it's because there are more sharks, or do you think it's a learned behavior kind of thing? Stuff like that. So we really rely on the public. We rely on the stakeholders for information. We rely on their input, and also our main focus is to share whatever we find with them to help them, because What's the point of doing the research if it doesn't get used?
What's the craziest thing you've ever seen on a
Oh my
an
gosh.
online survey or heard about?
Ooh, I mean, we've seen some crazy
What's
things.
the biggest, so the word depredation,
Yeah.
you know, like you reel in a fish head, that's like yesterday we caught a gaff top catfish and it severed right at the spikes in the fins by something much larger. We had dolphins trailing the boat yesterday, for example, but it didn't look like a dolphin bite. The odds are good that that big old catfish, which would have been this big, was just its head. You know, but like how many shark on shark on shark on shark, you know, head versus part of body versus whole body have you seen?
Oh,
I think probably, you know,
lots.
maybe three in a row type
Yeah.
of deal.
Most on one line I think is 3.
Yeah, it's
But-
pretty crazy to see.
But yeah.
Species-wise or lengthwise, we've seen some cool stuff. Really, really big tiger sharks. It's hard to even, until you see it yourself, you're like, it can't be that big.
Oh,
yeah,
totally.
absolutely. And then some pretty cool species. A couple years ago, we saw a new ray that we hadn't seen before that we thought was a southern stingray, new to us.
Say thank you for joining.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone who's joined us for the recording, and then you guys can continue
Yeah,
chatting
absolutely.
with the folks in the room, and if they'd like to come up and see things.
Yeah.